So I came up with an idea um, about a game that we can start learning to script and build more into Lumberyard. And it's where you are or the player essentially works as a excess material logistics manager, waste engineer. In the UK, they call them dustmen. The slang term in the United States is garbage man. And you pick up these garbage bags and you have to collect as many as you can through the neighborhood. You have to run and drop them off into a maybe space age garbage truck or something. I'll start building out documentation and stuff for this. But first, let's dive into visual scripting because that's probably something that I'm extremely interested in. I'm very comfortable with Unreal scripting, so I'm excited to see what the Lumberyard scripting system looks like. So the first thing we have to do though is go to Tools here, and you'll see down at the bottom it has Script Canvas. And at first this can seem a little daunting because on the side here, oops, let's leave this back in here. You have this node inspector, variable manager, kind of like your canvas in the middle. You have all these nodes for dragging out the individual components. There we go. This will help me expand it. That's all I wanted to do, so that we could see a little bit better in the video. Alright, so let's make a new script. And if you're comfortable with Unity's, even their mechanism system, you'll see that it has a similar grid to it. And here I can scroll in and out with my wheel. I can click my middle wheel in to pan, things like that. Now, if you don't see this node palette on the side, you can hit Control-Shift-L. Sometimes I believe it opens and it won't be there. These nodes are essentially how you would control things like events, where like you walk into a trigger and something happens, or game logic, AI intelligence, things like that. So it's essentially just a visual scripting engine, or visual scripting rather, to control our objects in the scene. Now we don't have a character in our scene yet, and we'll model like a really simple guy that's going to be our waste management engineer, and we'll rig him and we'll continuously iterate him on the animations and stuff. Like we'll need a pickup animation and things like that. Alright, so for now, let's close this out and let's create a entity that's going to represent our character. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to create entity. Now a lot of this stuff is not something that I was born with. It's videos I'm watching on the Lumberyard channel, and it's going through the documentation. So make sure that you follow along with that. I find I was a lot like this when I was a college student, or one of my students, is I sometimes really didn't like documentation, but to be honest with you, once you get into it and the more you do it, it becomes more comfortable. So if you happen to be one of those people. Now I want to name this this entity player. Now I keep a generic name like player at first, because until I actually give the character a name like Steve the custodial engineer, or you know, anything like that. But for now I'm going to rename that player. If we select our player here, I kind of want my inspector to be up here. Oop, not that high up. Let's see if I can get this here. Let's close our controls for a second here, console. Let's do default layout again, just so I get that back. There we go. Okay, so I struggled a little bit with that one. And then I'm going to close the console to give me a little bit more space. Okay, so here's my player entity. Now you can see my entity inspector opens up. And under add component here, I'm just going to select mesh. And what I want to do is, within this mesh selection, you can see there's a bunch of different options here. One of them being right here, which is where we can browse for an asset. And this is cool because you can select all of this stuff. Now there are some meshes, if you're using the starter content like this sphere, that you can just start off with. Let's see if there's anything else in here. This is kind of cool. Hologram sphere. So these are from the, because I'm using the starter game thing. Primitive spheres is what I'm actually looking for. So I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And now you can see that that opened up in our scene. Now there's a few other things that we want to add to this, and that's rigid body physics. If you're coming out of Unity, you probably heard of this before. So this is what gives our ball the ability to fall, things like that, the collision ability. We want a mesh collider so that it doesn't fall through the ground. So very similar again to Unreal or Unity, you know. And then we need a input component, and this is what's going to help us control the movement of the sphere here. I'm going to go ahead and hit Control S to save it at this point. Now, even though we added this input here, we need to bind this to our player. So under this input and event binding, click on this, and not this, sorry. We want to click on, where's my little, sorry, let me close that out. So we're going to be using this to bind this. So here in our asset editor, when we click this button right here, it opens up our asset editor for us. So let me go ahead and bring this up just a little bit. What we want to do here is we want to create a new event. So I'm going to click this plus sign here. And as I mentioned before, events are things like when you enter a trigger, it'll fire off certain things. We can also use events to move our character around. So for us, what I'm going to do is the event name is just going to be move_x. And this is going to be, this input event is going to help us control the movement on the x-axis. Now what I'd like to do is when I push A, I want my character to move to the left, and when I push D, I want it to move to the right. So it's kind of like the on the x-axis. So let's go ahead and do that. So in order to do that, they have these events generators here. And I'm going to hit plus on this, and you can see it says class to create here. I'm going to shrink this down a little bit. Let me pause it and do that. Now, this where it says class to create, if I click on this, you can see there's thumbstick input and this quote-unquote standard input, which I guess thumbstick would be considered standard input. This is where you want your keyboard inputs to come from. So I'm going to just hit OK on this. And you'll notice down here when I expand MoveX again, under events generators, it says one element. It says gamepad button input device. If I click on this, I can go down to keyboard, and then I can actually select which key. So I want to do alphanumeric A, which I believe I passed up. Now you see where it says event value here. What the event value is, if you're moving in, let's see if I could show you here. Notice in our translation over here, if I'm moving this on the x-axis, which is red, notice as I move in one direction, I subtract from the position there. If I move from the other direction, I add to it. Now, when I press A, I want my value to go -1. And so when I'm pushing that button, that value is going to be used to essentially move this left and right. And we want to add another input event. So go to event generators, hit the plus sign again, and just go ahead and hit OK. One more time for under input here. And I'm going to do the same thing where it says gamepad. I'm just going to go to keyboard. I want to use that same A key, but this time I want to go +1. So here's event value multiplier, +1. Now, if we're using a gamepad, there's a little, see where it says dead zone here? Dead zone essentially refers to where it's the dead center of the thing, but the D-pad, that's like the thumbstick. Over time, what tends to happen is, because of wear and play, it never sits directly at 0. So you want the dead zone to have a little bit of give. So in the documentation, they recommend 0.2. You know what, I'm sorry. I want my A to be my left and D to be my right. Sorry, it's a little early in the morning at this point. So here's D. So I'm going to go ahead and hit plus again here. And I'm just going to add 2 more inputs. I'm going to double click that and then drag that down. Oops. There we go. I'll just double click it, hit OK, and then add one more input here. Alright, so we have A here, and then for the this second value, here's A, and then here's D, and then this will move it in the right view. And then gamepad button A, we want to do keyboard. We want to do keyboard again here. For the keyboard here, I'm looking for the W key, because that's what's going to move our character on the y-axis here. And then we want to change the back of it to keyboard S. And for these values here, it says 1, and this one's going to be -1. Because again, if I move it in one direction, notice that the numbers go up and then the numbers go down, depending on the direction we're going on the y-axis. Okay. So we have ADWS, so those are set up. Oh, I forgot to add that same dead zone in case they decide to add a gamepad, like an Xbox controller, and they want to use the thumbstick. Now what we have to do is we have to save this input binding, so just go to File and then click on Save here. Now in the starter kit, the starter folder here, you can make a new folder called input binding. So like we'll just do IB here, and then inside the IB folder we can just save this off as maybe player, because this is going to be specifically for the player, and then just click OK, or save rather. You'll notice in the asset browser we have a new folder called IB with our player input bindings, and over here I can drag in that player input binding now. Now all we did is we set up our input bindings here. We didn't actually set up anything for movement. So what we'll do is in the next video is we'll go ahead and start diving into the script canvas, where we'll actually make the sphere move.